There's a certain kind of man who has never been cold a day in his life, and it shows in everything he does. The way he parks his car, the way he talks to people who owe him money, the way he smiles when he slides a foreclosure notice across a table. Preston Garfield was that kind of man, and on a Thursday morning in December, he drove his black SUV through a blizzard to take a 74-year-old farmer's land and made the single worst mistake of his career. But we'll get to that. The storm came in fast on a Wednesday night. By 8 o'clock, the roads through Duskpine County were gone. Not closed, just gone, swallowed under 14 inches of drifting snow. The kind of storm that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives the way trouble always does, quiet at first, then all at once. Cormac Hale was out by the barn when he saw the lights. Two pale beams cutting sideways through the dark, stuttering, going nowhere. A car had gone still on the county road that ran past the edge of his property. The old two-lane that nobody used in winter except people who didn't know better. He pulled his coat tighter and walked out. The car was a modest sedan, 10 years old at least, one rear tire half buried in a snowbank. Behind the wheel sat a woman, old, small, dressed head to toe in black. A wool habit, a white band at the collar, a rosary looped around one wrist. She was gripping the steering wheel with both hands and staring straight ahead the way people do when they're trying very hard not to panic. Cormac knocked on the window with 2 knuckles. She rolled it down an inch. "Engine's gone cold," he said. "You won't get it running tonight." She looked at him for a moment, measured, calm. Then she said, "I see." That was all. No hysteria. No flood of apologies, just "I see." The way a person speaks when they've learned that falling apart never once solved anything. He pushed the car to the shoulder with his truck, chained it to a post so it wouldn't drift further, and drove her back to the farmhouse without asking many questions. She offered her name, Sister Margaret, traveling from Billings to a small parish outside Coldwater Flats. She had misjudged the storm. The house was warm, one room warmer than the rest. The back bedroom, where an old cast-iron radiator had been running since October. Cormac showed her to that room, set a glass of water on the nightstand, put a spare wool blanket on the chair. "I'll be fine on the couch," he said. "This is your home," she said. "I won't take your bed." "You're not taking it. I'm giving it." She looked at him again with that same measuring look. Then she nodded once, set her small bag on the floor, and said goodnight. Cormac went back to the front room. He sat down in the old brocade armchair that had belonged to his father, pulled a blanket over his legs, and was asleep inside 10 minutes. He was not a man who lost sleep over things he couldn't change. He didn't know yet that the morning would bring something he could. There was no gradual build-up to Preston Garfield. He simply appeared. 7:40 in the morning. Cormac was at the stove, turning 2 eggs in a cast-iron pan, when he heard the crunch of tires on frozen gravel. He didn't look up immediately. Delivery trucks sometimes came early. Roy Dunbar from town occasionally stopped by unannounced. But delivery trucks don't idle that long, and Roy drove a dented Ford, not a black SUV with tinted windows and a bank decal on the rear glass. Cormac turned off the burner. He stepped onto the porch just as Preston Garfield was climbing out of the passenger side, vest under his coat, leather document case under his arm, a younger man behind him carrying a second folder and a roll of yellow tape. The kind of tape with black lettering. The kind that means stay out. Garfield didn't walk to the door. He walked to the fence post nearest the road and began taping. "Mr. Hale." He didn't look up while he said it. "You've received 3 written notices from Irongate Savings and Trust. 93 days past due on a note of $140,000. As of today, this property is subject to seizure proceedings under Montana foreclosure statute." He smoothed the tape flat with his palm. Pressed the corners down. Cormac stood on the porch steps with his arms at his sides. "I know what I owe," he said. "Then you know why I'm here." Garfield finally looked at him. He had the kind of face that had once been handsome and knew it. "You have 48 hours to vacate the primary residence. Any livestock on the property becomes collateral asset after that point." The front door opened behind Cormac. Sister Margaret stepped out onto the porch, cup of coffee in both hands, taking in the cold morning air with the unhurried composure of someone who has seen worse scenes than this. Garfield's eyes moved to her. "Stayed there a beat too long." A slow smile. "You can't pay your mortgage," he said to Cormac, "but you're running a shelter for strays." He looked Sister Margaret up and down once. The old habit. the worn travel bag visible through the doorway, the scuffed shoes. "Get her out of here. You've got enough problems without feeding someone else's charity case." Silence. Sister Margaret raised her cup and took a slow sip of coffee. She said nothing. Cormac looked at Garfield the way a man looks at bad weather. Not angry, not afraid. Just noting it, measuring how long it would last. 48 hours, Garfield repeated. He got back in the SUV. The engine turned over. The tires crunched back down the gravel drive. The yellow tape flapped once in the wind and went still. If you've ever watched someone treat a decent person like that, in their own home, on their own land, you know exactly what that feeling is. Hold on to it, because by the end of this, you'll feel something else entirely. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. This kind of story doesn't end the way you think it does. The SUV disappeared around the bend. Cormac stood on the porch a moment longer, looking at the yellow tape on his fence post. Then he turned and went inside. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down at the kitchen table. Sister Margaret sat across from him. She didn't offer comfort, didn't fill the silence with words that wouldn't help. She simply held her cup and waited, the way people do when they understand that some moments need to be sat through, not talked through. After a while she asked, "Are you afraid?" Cormac thought about it honestly. "Afraid won't change the number," he said. "And that land's been in my family since my grandfather broke the first field. So I suppose I'll find another way before I find fear." He set down his cup and pushed back from the table. The back hallway of the farmhouse was narrow and low-ceilinged, lined with coat hooks and old boots and 3 generations of accumulated quiet. At the end of it, behind the water heater, sat a metal box, olive green, the size of a shoebox, the kind the army used to issue for personal documents. His father's name was still stenciled on the side in faded black paint. Cormac carried it to the kitchen table and opened it. Inside, a deed, a survey map from 1959, 2 insurance documents, a folded letter, and at the bottom, a small notebook filled with his father's handwriting. Every transaction, every payment, every date, recorded in pencil in a hand so careful it looked almost like engraving. He didn't read it yet. He picked up the telephone, the old landline mounted on the wall, and dialed a number he knew without looking it up. 3 rings. "Roy, it's Cormac Hale. I need you to come out to the farm. Bring whatever you've got on Montana lending law." A pause on the other end. "How bad?" Roy asked. Cormac looked out the kitchen window at the yellow tape catching the morning light. "Come and see," he said. Sister Margaret was washing the breakfast dishes when Cormac came back to the kitchen. She worked quietly, methodically, the way someone works when they've spent decades in places where stillness is not emptiness, but discipline. She rinsed each cup and set it upside down on the cloth without a sound. Cormac sat back down at the table with his father's notebook open in front of him. After a few minutes, she dried her hands and turned around. "May I use your telephone?" she asked. "I need to make one call." "It's on the wall," Cormac said. "Take as long as you need." She crossed to it, lifted the receiver, and dialed from memory. A long number, more digits than a local call. Cormac wasn't listening. He was tracing his father's penciled columns with one finger. Dates, amounts, the name Irongate appearing for the first time 8 years ago, when he'd taken the loan to replace the well system and the east fence line after the flood year. But he heard her voice, low, unhurried, the tone of someone accustomed to being listened to. "It's Margaret." "Yes, I'm in Dusk Pine County. I'll be delayed a day." A pause. "Before I forget, pull up our institutional account with Irongate Savings and Trust in Montana. I want a full position summary on my desk when I return." Another pause, longer. "No, don't do anything yet. I'll tell you when." She hung up, came back to the table and sat down. Cormac looked up from the notebook. Something had shifted, barely, the way light shifts in a room when a cloud moves. He couldn't have named what it was, just a quality in the way she held herself. The particular stillness of someone who has just set something in motion and is in no hurry to watch it arrive. He glanced at her travel bag on the chair by the door. Small bag, worn strap, but on the front pocket, embroidered in dark blue thread, neat and small, M. Foley, C.O.H. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked back at his father's notebook. "Roy should be here within the hour," he said. "Good," she said. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky over Hale Creek Farm had gone a pale, cold, perfect blue. The kind of sky that comes after a storm has finished everything it came to do. Roy Dunbar arrived at 10:30. He was 61 years old, drove a dented green Ford, and had practiced law in Coldwater Flats for 33 years without ever once moving his office to a bigger town. He carried his briefcase the way farmers carry toolboxes, worn handle, no apology for the scratches. He shook Cormac's hand at the door, nodded politely to Sister Margaret, sat down at the kitchen table and opened the briefcase without preamble. "Show me everything Irongate ever sent you," he said. Cormac laid it out. Every letter, every payment stub, the original loan agreement from 8 years back. The 3 default notices. Roy read without speaking, turning pages slowly, going back occasionally to reread a paragraph, his finger tracing a line of fine print the way a man traces a crack in a wall, looking for where it started. 20 minutes passed. Sister Margaret sat in the armchair by the window with a paperback she'd found on the shelf. She turned pages at a steady pace. She did not appear to be listening. She appeared to be reading. These are not always the same thing. Roy set down the last document. He took off his glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on. "Cormac," he said, "when did Irongate notify you that they were adjusting the variable rate on this note?" "They sent a letter. Maybe 2 years back. Do you have it?" Cormac went to the metal box, sorted through, found an envelope with the Irongate letterhead, handed it over. Roy looked at the postmark, looked at the date on the letter inside, looked at the effective date of the rate change printed in the second paragraph. He set it down on the table very carefully. "They gave you 11 days' notice," Roy said. "Montana Consumer Loan Act requires a minimum of 30 for a variable rate adjustment on an agricultural note. 11 days isn't close. It isn't even in the same county as close." Cormac said nothing. "The adjusted interest they've been charging you for the past 22 months is unlawful," Roy continued. "Which means the balance they're claiming, the $140,000, is not the correct figure. Strip out the unlawful interest and you're looking at somewhere around 87,000, maybe less. They can still foreclose on 87, Cormac said. "They can try," Roy said. "But the moment we file a notice of dispute citing the Montana statute violation, the foreclosure clock stops. And then we countersue for the unlawful charges plus damages. At minimum, you're looking at full debt restructuring. At maximum," he paused, "at maximum, Irongate walks away from this note entirely just to make the lawsuit disappear." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a crow landed on the fence post beside the yellow tape. Sat there a moment, flew off. "Draw it up," Cormac said. Roy was already writing. What happened next, Cormac didn't learn until later. At 9:17 that same morning, while Roy was still driving out from Coldwater Flats, an email landed in the inbox of Irongate Savings and Trust's board of directors. It came from the legal office of an organization called Covenant of the Open Hand. The email was 3 paragraphs long, formal, precise, the kind of language that doesn't raise its voice because it doesn't need to. It stated that Covenant of the Open Hand was initiating the withdrawal of its full institutional holdings from Irongate Savings and Trust, $47 million in deposits, certificates, and long-term bonds, effective within 72 hours, citing a clause in their partnership agreement regarding conduct inconsistent with the organization's ethical standards. It did not name Preston Garfield. It did not need to. The board had one institutional client of that size. Everyone in that building knew exactly which branch manager had been in the field that morning. Everyone knew exactly what had happened on the porch of a farmhouse in Duskpine County. By 11:15, 3 board members were on a conference call. By noon, Preston Garfield's direct line was ringing from a number he had never once expected to see on his screen. He let it go to voicemail. It didn't matter. They left a message. 36 hours later, the black SUV came back. This time there was no second car, no assistant with a folder, no yellow tape, just Garfield, alone, pulling up the gravel drive at 2:30 in the afternoon with the careful slowness of a man who has spent the last day and a half trying to work out how a simple foreclosure became the worst week of his career. Cormac was splitting wood by the side of the barn. He heard the car, didn't stop swinging. Roy Dunbar was already there, sitting on the porch steps with his briefcase open across his knees, a pen behind his ear, a thermos of coffee beside him. He had driven out that morning when Cormac called to say he had a feeling company was coming. Roy had simply said, "I'll bring the paperwork." Garfield got out of the car. He was still dressed well. That hadn't changed, but something behind the eyes had. The particular brightness that comes from believing you are untouchable had gone flat, the way a fire goes flat when the oxygen runs out. He looked at Roy, then at Cormac, still splitting wood. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I think there may have been some miscommunication around the terms of your note." Cormac set the axe head down on the stump, rested both hands on the handle, looked at Garfield the way he'd looked at the yellow tape 2 mornings ago. "Roy," he said. "Go ahead." Roy stood up from the porch steps and opened the briefcase on the hood of his Ford. He laid out 3 documents in a row, turned them to face Garfield, and stepped back. Notice of statutory violation under the Montana Consumer Loan Act, citing insufficient notification period on variable rate adjustment. Formal dispute of the claimed default balance, and a counter demand for restitution of unlawfully collected interest plus consequential damages, totaling $41,200. Garfield picked up the first document. He read the first page, turned to the second. His jaw moved slightly, the way jaws move when the mind is working hard and not getting anywhere useful. He put it down. His phone buzzed in his coat pocket. He looked at the screen. The color left his face the way color leaves the sky before a hard frost, gradually, then completely. He didn't answer it. "Mr. Garfield," Roy said, "you can contest this, of course. That's your right. But I'd suggest you speak with your board before you decide, because I think you'll find they have some opinions about further litigation exposure at this particular moment." Garfield stood very still. Cormac picked up the axe again, set another log on the stump, swung once, clean through the center. He did not look at Garfield. He didn't need to. There are men who need to watch the moment their enemy breaks. Cormac Hale was not one of them. He already knew what the sound of splitting wood meant. Garfield gathered the documents slowly, folded them, put them under his arm. He walked back to the SUV without another word. He drove away. Roy watched the car disappear around the bend, picked up his thermos, poured 2 cups. "He'll be gone by Friday," Roy said. Cormac took the cup. "Doesn't matter to me either way," he said. They drank their coffee standing in the cold afternoon light, the kind of light that sits low and long in December, turning everything it touches the color of old gold. Preston Garfield was dismissed from Iron Gate Savings and Trust on a Thursday. No severance, no announcement. A box of personal items left at the front desk for him to collect after hours, the way institutions dispose of things they'd rather not be seen handling. The foreclosure notice on Cormac's fence post was removed the following Monday by a junior employee who drove out from the Coldwater Flats branch and didn't say much beyond mourning and sorry for the inconvenience. Cormac accepted the apology the way he accepted most things, quietly, without theater. 3 weeks later, a certified letter arrived from Iron Gate's legal department. The language was formal and bloodless, the way institutional surrender always is. The remaining loan balance had been restructured to reflect the corrected principal. The unlawfully collected interest had been reversed. A separate check was enclosed for $41,200. The full counter-demand figure Roy had put on the hood of his Ford. Cormac signed the acknowledgement, mailed it back the same day. He used the money to fix the barn roof, the one that had been leaking since the spring of 2021, patched twice with tar and prayer, never properly dealt with. He hired 2 men from town, bought good timber, and had it done in 4 days. The rest he put back in the metal box. A letter came separately, about 10 days after the settlement. Not from a law firm. Not from a bank. A plain white envelope postmarked from Billings. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Handwritten in blue ink, small and even, the penmanship of someone trained in an era when handwriting was considered a form of respect. "Dear Mr. Hale, I am grateful for the warmth of your home and the decency you showed a stranger in a storm. Both are rarer than they should be. I hope the land stays in your family for another 100 years. M. Foley." Cormac read it once, then again. He folded it carefully and placed it in the metal box, beside the deed, beside the survey map, beside his father's notebook with its columns of careful pencil. He closed the lid. He had never looked up who Margaret Foley was, had never searched the name on the embroidered bag, had never asked what C.O.H stood for. It didn't change anything he would have done. That was the whole point. Some people move through the world calculating what kindness might return to them. Cormac Hale was not that kind of man. He saw a person stranded in a blizzard. He pushed her car to the shoulder. He gave her the warm room. That's all he did. And somehow, the way things sometimes do when the right forces are quietly in motion, the world straightened itself out around that single, unremarkable act of decency. Preston Garfield had every advantage. The credentials, the institution, the legal machinery, the contempt that powerful men wear like armor. He lost everything in 72 hours. Not because of a lawsuit, not because of a technicality in a loan agreement, because he walked onto a man's porch and looked at a stranger like she was nothing. Subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and it hits just as hard.